The Pilgrims. In the patriotic song titled America, the poet called America land of the Pilgrims' pride. Who were these pilgrims, and where did they come from? About 400 years ago, 13 years after the first English settlement in America, called Jamestown, there was another group of travelers who came to America in search of religious freedom. They wanted to worship God in their own way and separate from the Church of England. They formed their own congregation and called themselves saints. The saints came under persecution in England, and many of these people moved to Holland in the Netherlands, seeking religious liberty and a better life. In Holland, life became unbearable. These people could not find jobs, and the parents did not like the bad influence that the local culture was having on their own children. The saints packed up their few possessions, gathered their families, and went back to England. In England, they again faced persecution and were sent to prison. They wanted to go to America, where they could be free to live according to their own beliefs. They bargained and paid for passage across the Atlantic Ocean on 2 ships, the Speedwell and the Mayflower. In the summer of 1620, these 2 ships set sail for a new land where these people could fulfill their hopes and dreams of a new life. 300 miles and many days out to sea, the Speedwell began leaking water into the ship. It could not be repaired at sea, and both ships returned to the harbor. It was decided that the Mayflower would sail alone, and the people and cargo that could fit were transferred to the Mayflower. The Mayflower finally set sail for America on the 6th of September, 1620. The passengers on the Mayflower were known as saints, strangers, and crew. Those who were believers and members of the congregation were saints. The strangers were those who were still looking for a better life, away from England, and to get and develop land, but were not members of the congregation. And the crew were the officers and working hands on the ship. Altogether, there were about 130 people. The first half of the voyage went smooth. The seas were calm, and good progress was made, but many of the travelers still became sick, and during the second half of the journey, the seas were rough and stormy. The winds were so fierce that the crew had to drop the sails on the ship, allowing it to drift freely. The Mayflower became damaged, and many believed they would not make their intended destination. It was a long and difficult voyage. The Mayflower was a small ship, only 100 feet long. It was crowded. There was not enough fresh water. It was stinky, dirty, and cold. 2 people died. One of them a young man who fell overboard during a very turbulent storm. He was not recovered. After 66 days at sea, the shipmen cried out, "Land ho!" America had been sighted. Surprisingly, they were not far from where they intended to make landfall. Upon arriving, the Pilgrims made an agreement on paper about how their new colony would be run. They created and signed a document, which today is called the Mayflower Compact. The compact stated they were loyal to the King of England, were Christians who served God, laws they make will be fair, and everyone would work for the good of the colony. Each man, before leaving the ship, was asked to sign the Mayflower Compact. The Pilgrims searched the New England coast for a place to settle and decided on the area already named by previous explorers to the area. There was land for planting crops, a harbor for ships, and a river for fresh water. They built their village and established Plymouth Colony in what is now the state of Massachusetts, inside Cape Cod. Although the Pilgrims were happy to have settled in America, they faced a difficult and cold winter. They were not prepared. They built a large house and some smaller homes, yet for a period people still slept on the Mayflower. That first winter in Plymouth Colony, almost half of the people died, It was a very hard and harsh life. Native Americans were already living in America for thousands of years before these settlers from England arrived. The Native Americans were not surprised to see these new visitors, since explorers and hunters and fishermen had been here before. When the Mayflower arrived, the Native Americans saw these families with men, women, and children come off the ship. It was hoped that they would come in peace. There was not much integration that first winter between the Native Americans and those of Plymouth Colony. The Pilgrims and Native Americans formed a treaty that helped for peaceful relations between these two cultures. They would trade for furs, food, and tools. After the first harvest in 1621, a year after their arrival in this land that held great promise and hope for these immigrants, the Pilgrims invited some of the Native Americans to join them for a feast. The Pilgrims provided food of their harvest, and the Native Americans provided venison from the deer they had hunted. This is referred to as the first Thanksgiving, as the tradition continued after every harvest in the years that followed. Life was not easy for the Pilgrims, especially in those first years. The most important thing for them was to freely practice their religion. As the years went by, the community of settlers from England grew to the 13 original colonies, and then to the United States of America.